Thanks so much, Emily. So I will assure you all, disclaimer, that our slides won't be as graph heavy as Andreas's, and we won't be talking about stage rollouts and whatnot, kind of like Emily, but
over the head.
Over the head, but we're here talking about content, and content as it relates to YouTube. And I'm on the YouTube end, and who better to bring than a YouTuber himself? You're all the way from Boston. And we're going to be talking about mobile gaming content and kind of the rise of how users have been consuming content around on YouTube around this category. So I'll do some slides, let's see, about kind of like where mobile gaming has come from, right? So obviously a huge evolution from kind of linear puzzle games like a Tetris to all of a sudden a worldwide kind of interactive PvP game such as Clash Royale. And when talking about these kind of games and the way that content is consumed, they obviously have very different characteristics. Replayability, kind of iterative game modes, which gives folks like Tim a lot more content to make once a game is both launched and has DLC coming out regularly. So, mobile gaming on YouTube has really seen a huge increase in the past 2 years as far as hours watched is a main metric that we use at YouTube, not so much views anymore, more just total, empirical hours or time watched has just completely blown up. And I think games like the Supercell games, Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, games like Pokemon Go, which saw a huge spike last year, and other games like Puzzles and Dragons or Lineage or Angry Birds have really led to this sudden increase on both content produced and content consumed. So this is kind of just a brief timeline of how watch time on YouTube has been really expanding since all the way in 2015. So as you can see, the launch of Clash Royale kind of led to a little bit of a spike, and then last year, Pokemon Go was kind of a phenomenal event that we've been tracking, which led to a sudden peak. The slope is still very much steady, and we see a steady increase in the way people are consuming games. And it's really encouraging just to see creators also adopt mobile-first strategies in the way that their channel DNA is composed. So, Ash, to you. So I was kind of doing some digging. And I think September 2nd, almost 3 years ago, was the first time that you really, took a stab at uploading YouTube content. Can you tell me a little bit about what was going through your head when you were, thinking, what is the first video before hitting the publish button?
Sure, yes. So I had absolutely no experience in A, mobile gaming, or B, in YouTube, certainly. So I lacked the technical expertise along with just the networking that you would think one should have if they want to endeavor to establish a really good YouTube channel. So I didn't have any of that, and I had really bad quality to boot. And I just uploaded a few videos just for it was for Clash of Clans at the time, and it was just for my guild, my clan inside the game, just to cover special events that we were hosting. And now 3 years later, I'm here on the stage with you somehow. I don't know how the heck it happened, but.
So obviously, like you said, your content started off, I'll be kind of a dick here and say it was kind of rough.
Yeah, to say the least.
I was watching it, and it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
And now,
what a great host.
Now you have a very beautiful intro, and clearly, I think directionally things have kind of changed. But can you kind of tell me what is necessarily changed, both within the game, what's given you more encouragement to continue uploading?
Yeah, so I think you were being kind. It was absolutely awful. You can see I didn't even utilize the full landscape mode. But I think that when I started, I just wanted to do it purely as a small little hobby. I didn't even think it was possible for someone like me. When I started my YouTube channel, I was 32. I was playing with 16-year-olds, kind of creepy, I know. But there wasn't. I didn't think that I had that infectious personality that could certainly take off. So I just had, I set really, really minimal goals for myself, just learning one new thing a week and trying to apply it to my channel. As I like to tackle bigger things in life, no matter what you're doing, is try to continue to get better at it. So that was really, that led to not even close to where I see myself right now as the final product. So I'm still kind of continuing on those trends, but yeah, just one thing at a time.
And you're up to what, 500,000?
We're closing in, but
subscribers?
Yeah. So certainly not the biggest in the ecosystem, but I've managed to do it just to inject a little bit of pride, I've managed to do it kind of sticking to myself and not being someone who I'm not, and covering more strategic elements of games rather than being a big personality.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, there's obviously tons of it's very subjective, like really what makes good content, and what did you find really, did you stick to? And I guess, is this the game subject matter? Was this a certain format? What do you really define as good content and content that your audience really not only watched for the first time, but continued watching?
Yeah, so it's definitely different for every individual and every content creator and every developer, what kind of content you're looking for your game. But for me, I've always just strived to make content that I would want to watch. Really basic and cliche, but I just, I think it takes a lot of grit when you're starting out in YouTube, just as you're starting out as a game developer, where, you're not going to experience as much as people like to believe their channel is going to blow up one day and they're just going to be a millionaire. It just doesn't work like that. You have to kind of get through that first year or even more sometimes of seeing stagnant, if any, growth. So what I think makes good content is being true to yourself, and at the same time, not being afraid to be transparent and also be honest. So, I've always built my channel around, even if I have good relationships with all the developers that I work with, I think that I'm honest, and I really love opinion pieces, if you will. So I just think making your content worth watching, no matter what that vehicle is to get it there, is really important. How do you differentiate yourself from everybody out there making content on the same games? So I think being a little bit unique, but staying true to yourself, kind of working within your personality to make content.
Something I've noticed is, some of these top grossing games oftentimes don't have any or very low viewership on the YouTube platform.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of intuition or kind of hypothesis around that? Games that a ton of people play and spend and, clearly come back after the first try, but, they really aren't watching any kind of content. Like, what are some things you really think lead to that, or some of the problems there?
Yeah, so the developers that I work with have really valued community, almost to its detriment at some times, but it pays off in the long term. Some developers are lucky enough to have billions of marketing dollars, if not hundreds of millions or millions. And those type of games, in my opinion, no matter what they do, they're going to succeed because they're throwing so much money. Like Mobile Strike, no offense if Mobile Strike's developers here, but like if you throw millions and millions and millions of dollars into the game, of course you're going to generate users, thus rank high on the App Store, thus continue to get that momentum. But I think that what a lot of developers miss is how to use content creators strategically to grow that ecosystem around their game, and I think they do it in the wrong way a lot of times. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. So you touched briefly on the detriment sometimes of growing community. I have to guess, like, negative feedback and kids on Facebook saying,
yeah. So the games I cover, they can't put out a tweet about their game without getting the top tweets, or your game sucks, it's dying, whatever. But that's a good thing because people are so passionate about it. It's better than sending out a tweet about your game and getting absolutely no response.
Right. So I kind of want to touch on the nuances, of like capturing mobile content. I come from the PC console world, so I think the path was a little bit clearer when certain hardware like capture cards were released, and encoding software, and the way to record both like VOD content and live streams, it was a lot more commonly known, right? But when it comes to mobile content and how you capture it, can you talk a little bit about like your setup and maybe some of the nuances of how you can capture from a device or from like your tablet or phone, and how you actually eventually get the video content that you're recording to your computer and up on YouTube?
Sure, I think this is a hurdle that's becoming easier and easier to clear, with technology kind of moving in the direction where you can easily record your device. However, I think it's really paramount for developers to work with content creators to help kind of increase their value, right? Their production value. And you can record right from your screen now with a lot of different apps, a lot of mirror type apps. Me personally, I use a device hardware called Elgato, where you can just use a lightning cable or HDMI cable and just hook right up directly. So there's a lot of ways to do it, even with emulators, but it's up to basically try to find the highest quality way that you can possibly A, understand, and B, afford to use.
Well, I think it's kind of ironic because a lot of people are consuming the mobile game content on their phones, but the broadcasters, you're still pretty much wired to a very static kind of setup, right?
Indeed,
and
yeah.
Until kind of like Wi-Fi capabilities and some things might be able to shift, or storage space even on a phone, you know, you're still kind of locked to a very static setup.
Yeah, it's true, and I think that hopefully we'll kind of move in the right direction, but yeah, that's kind of where it is right now.
So let's talk about kind of like ways developers have embraced YouTubers, like kind of going left to right. Someone like the largest YouTube creator PewDiePie had worked with a developer in order to make his own game. I think Supercell is quite a good job using their talent as beacons to both announce game mode launches or new cards or anything else going on, and then kind of like Best Fiends model where YouTubers and influencers are actually built into the games. In your kind of experience, what have you seen, or like what are your kind of best practices or ways that developers have used, both you and some of the community in the space, and like what is good and what is kind of bad?
Yeah, so I mean, I started out back in 2015 when I got kind of into the NDA club for Supercell. And at that time, there was only 11 people. I was the 11th. We're in a small little Skype group with not a lot of organization. I mean, they did a good job, obviously. They were one of the first major mobile developers to kind of embrace YouTubers. But at that point, now in just 3 short years, we've grown to over 200 people, content creators, and it's run in a lot of different ways. But, you know, with the big companies that already have that ecosystem of content creators, it's really easy, right? So we have those relationships. They say, hey, a new game's coming out, and boom, we're there. That's it, you know? But 2 pillars of Supercell has always been, even before they blew up with Heyday and Clash of Clans in 2014 and 15, they've never paid anybody to cover their games, and they've never given in-game resources, which are 2 really strong values to have. And I think that it's really easy to say that and really hard to execute on a community or a content creator strategy without using those 2 resources. But they've always had the mentality that we just want people to organically play our game or cover our game without having to give them stuff to do it. So instead of that, they've tried to create ways to grow influencers' channels who they work with as kind of the carrot, and then they'll want to cover the game because they'll get so many views. So I think that the best ways to try to build your own community of content creators, if you're a developer, in my opinion, just from seeing so many companies pay so much money to my colleagues and me, the offers that we get, you know, for one video can triple our monthly YouTube income, you know? So I don't think that that's money necessarily well spent, although it might acquire more users as, you know, advertising on Facebook, say. But I do think that the best strategy, in my opinions, and I've consulted with other developers who've done this, is to kind of pick small to mid-tier YouTubers who you're a real big fan of their production. You feel like they jive well with what you're trying to portray to the public, and try to help them grow. And the biggest incentive for me, especially when I was a smaller YouTuber, is to share their content in-game, especially kind of revolving around updates. Because what that does is it sends your traffic from the game to the content creator's YouTube channel, and that incentivizes us to continue to cover the game beyond just that one sponsored video. So I think that moving a step further than that, having live events. I've traveled the world, been lucky enough, and like I said, it's surreal to me because, you know, I'm a 35-year-old. I was a mail carrier for 13 years, and, you know, just not much going on, you know, in terms of...
Don't discredit mail carriers.
You're already dissed my production quality. I might as well just drive myself into the ground. But seriously, ultimately, it's just the fact that there's a big thirst, I think, for content creators and community, and I think that neither the content creators nor the third parties who work with the developers and content creators or the developers really utilize it in a great way.
Would you say then that kind of the community at some point takes on a little bit of a life of its own, you know, and kind of transcends maybe even the updates, or keeps, you know, the valleys kind of alive while peak updates are kind of, you know, in the works?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. You know, and I worked with a smaller developer, and we recruited just 2 YouTubers, one with 4,000 subscribers and one with 9,000 subscribers, and we put them into their game, just kind of like I talked to you about earlier, and now they're organically covering the game. And that's like the best case scenario, because then you can kind of grow together, and then your players know where to find information about updates, about whatever content that you want to highlight, and it's kind of a symbiotic relationship rather than just a transactional relationship.
Sure,
you know?
sure. So yeah, we're joking about this before. Again, I
another flattering pick.
could have picked a better picture on this one, but I think it's really interesting when talking about like the day in the life of someone who kind of does this as your career, right? Like you said, you were delivering mail for like almost over a decade, and then you kind of just recently, within the past 6 months,
like 8 months or so,
8 months,
yeah.
transitioned to doing content creation full time. Like, what does a day, what does a day in the life of you kind of look like? Like, what is a good day and what's a bad day, and how can, developers and how can like the game publishers kind of like help with making your days better?
That's a big question, Lester. I think that my life is certainly not anything that exciting. I go to an office, I rented office space, and I just work on my video early, get that all set, and then, of course, leaving a government job, albeit not the best one in the world, but just a steady government job for something as insecure, or at least it feels so insecure, as a YouTube channel is a big step. So what I've done is basically put as many eggs in the different baskets as I possibly could. So I do consulting, and I work for a couple startup companies. Also, I guess a community manager for a game coming out soon. So I think that what I've tried to do is just provide that conduit from the influencers, the developers, and I've just spend most of my time just networking, really, So as far as what a developer can do for somebody like me, is I think that we need to kind of have a healthier relationship, developers and content creators, because I think that we both have a lot to offer, but for some reason, like I said before, there's just that missing link somewhere, and I don't think that right now, I don't think that the current system really works for anybody,
Be honest, how long do you spend responding to comments on your YouTube channel?
An hour, actually. I spend an hour a day, which is probably 59 minutes more than anybody else does, at least, because it takes a lot of time. But I found that, this is kind of apropos of nothing, I guess, but I find that to get good YouTube engagement, if you train your viewers that you're going to respond in the first half an hour, hour and a half, however long that is, it creates a real, a huge spike in community around your channel. So I think that that's really key to my growth strategy in YouTube.
So kind of we've touched on this in many different ways, but when I was kind of looking at the landscape of some of these games that even the past 2 years have kind of exploded, and I look at the volume of games, and then I also look at the volume of YouTube channels that have sprouted up. I think I was pulling some stats before this. I think currently there's around 39 or 40 YouTube channels this year that breached the 1 million subscriber mark. So huge kind of new audience, right, where mobile first, or mobile gaming creators are also attracting a mobile viewing first audience. What do you think? Is there like a prescriptive recipe for success? I think you kind of maybe touched on it when talking about going for the middle tier channels, but do you see any kind of pattern that tends to work more frequently than ones that don't?
Yeah, like you said, I touched on like some of the things that I feel passionately about is I do feel like just paying for videos is just not a good strategy. I mean, Pokemon Go, Vainglory, Supercell Games, a small minority of companies who don't do that. I'm sure there's a lot others, but I just don't think it's a great strategy. I think that having live events and developing community like that, and maybe paying for somebody to make an appearance is okay. I think there's other ways to do things as well. Like if you reach out to a content creator, they might not even know your game. So how are you going to get them to the point where you want to show off your game without giving them at least in-game resources? But some strategies that some companies that I've worked with have used is just giving them stock footage and then allowing them to maybe play the game on an account that's progressed a little bit further, but not giving them that as a resource, because I think valuing your own in-game economy to the fact that you just won't give it out for people to promote you is important. But of course, that's probably an unpopular opinion because it's what everybody does right now. At least everybody, that's what all my emails are filled with. So I do think that the missing link here is that you want people to cover your game organically, but they won't do that unless they get the views. So how do you kind of remedy that?
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of thing because you know, like I noticed especially too, the amount of views generated, I think, between the large updates on games is often like, what do you do when there's not enough content to be created around, right? I think they kind of touched on it before. It's like you want to launch your game with a lot of content, but then when you also think about the long-term cycle of a game, what happens to you as a creator when there isn't, like how long would you say that threshold is before you start being like, man, I got to move on to a new game, or there's not enough content to be made here?
Yeah, it's tough from our perspective, just as a developer perspective. It's just that you can only do a video daily. I've had over almost 1,300 videos, but you can only do videos daily on a game doing the same thing for so long unless you really have a unique set of something that you're bringing to the table, you know? So I have my own kind of flavor, but you're right. We're always looking for that next game that's going to take off. And the problem is that boxes out all the small games that are worth looking into, you know? So I don't know the perfect solution other than...
It's almost like flip-flopped where you said maybe some of the developers or publishers should look at the middle tier.
I think so.
Creators, it's almost like you might be able to find a niche by looking at some of the...
I think so. I think that if I was going to develop a game and I want to give a great strategy for getting content creators on board, I would try to reach out to someone who has a little bit of influence inside the ecosystem and then have them almost recruit other content creators who are smaller to bring on board. You know, that's kind of my favorite strategy of growing a community. Or even taking someone who's maybe an influencer in your game. Maybe you don't have content creators who cover your game, but you have forums of passionate players. Maybe just kind of mentoring and paying, hey, we'll buy you whatever, a PC if it takes it, you know, we'll buy you an Elgato to a smaller scale, and we'll share your content, we'll help you grow together. Like, I think that's a great strategy to use, and it doesn't pay those immediate dividends like a paid promotion does. But and maybe there is a time and a place for a paid promotion, but I just don't think it's a good, you know, community building strategy.
Sure.
Just instant downloads, you know.
So moving on, I think, you know, like a big question, this is kind of a loaded slide, but like kind of what is, in your eyes, the future of mobile gaming? I think when I look at each of these, I think of a new, you know, supermassive game IP that could horizon and have huge implications in the West. I think, you know, Supercell obviously has Brawl Stars coming out. That could be interesting as far as the size of the company it's coming from. Again, you know, there's an eSports aspect that to consider, right, as far as extending mobile games IP with something like the Crown Championship. And then lastly, kind of just talking about devices and hardware, like, you know, phones that have better kind of built-in both cameras and hardware and usability and screen size and all these things. And how do you really, you know, you can jump into any one of these, like where do you really see some of these futures going?
Geez, like you said, it is a big, big question. But me personally, I think that a lot of the global market has been devalued based on the advertising dollars or various other factors. But I think that might be a mistake. Just from I've never seen a more passionate base of players than I've seen in, say, Brazil, the Portuguese, Spanish-speaking communities, or India. You know, I think that's an untapped audience to some extent, and even in countries less fortunate, everybody still has a mobile device, or a lot of people do. So I think that there's millions of players who can be who are basically, there's a big appetite for these games in those markets, but people just don't market to them because that's not what advertisers want oftentimes. So I think that the future of mobile gaming is definitely global, and I think that capturing that global market should be a priority, at least in my mind. I mean, I can tell you that covering Clash Royale and Supercell games as I do, there's no more rabid fan base, there's no more faster growing fan base than those Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking communities. Even Germany to a lesser extent, in India, in Malaysia, Philippines, like these are all markets that the appetite is so huge for these mobile games. So I think that just capitalizing on the global scale and not devaluing it too much just because of advertising and the bottom line, I think that that could be a mistake. I think that the future is global. You know, I mean, these games have such huge potential. Arena of Valor with Strike of Kings in China, which is the #1 game the last like 2 years, incredible. I mean, the government instituted laws where limiting the amount of play that you could have on a mobile game, which is crazy. So that's been rebranded to Arena of Valor and is launching in November. CCGS, which is the Clash Royale Global Championship, kind of proves that mobile can be an esport, and we'll see, just how far they can take that. But it is a $1 million contest in London next month, so it's playing a mobile game, which is something we've never seen before. Yeah,
I know we're kind of discussing this at lunch, kind of like a revenue-first model between developers, having a lot of hooks in order to, incentivize purchase and whatnot, and how that also fits into the same conversation of fair competitive play, right? Like making sure that there's an equal playing field, that it's embracing kind of the every man, like a woman to play competitively. Do you have any opinions about that, or how you see the balance between, revenue-driving games versus purely competitive games? Because I think it's hard to really breach the gap of esports without really addressing that.
Yeah, it's people way smarter than me have spent so much time thinking about this, and I think that it's, at least from Supercell's vantage point, again, who I work with closely, and Tencent as well, it's making sure that you value the casual gamer as paramount to your success, and at the same time building that infrastructure for competitive gaming, kind of as an afterthought at this point. I wish it was more than that, but that's just kind of what I've seen. And maybe Vainglory being the one exception right now in mobile gaming, which they're really full throttle onto the competitive scene, not so much on the casual scene. But then I think that ultimately there's a reason they're not quite as successful as the other big games, because they've kind of honed in so closely on those.
Sure. So I kind of like, this is kind of geared towards you just because of the start of your channel has been on Clash of Clans. You've evolved in the past 2 years towards Clash Royale. And I mean, this is like, you can take it a few different ways, right? Like as far as community building, not just, like gameplay mechanics or releases or anything else like that, who do you really think, as far as philosophy goes, can really step up to the plate?
Yeah, so without naming any certain developers, I think that creating that community is definitely so important, right? I think that, like we've talked about throughout this whole discussion, is to not at least try to get content creators on board with your game. They'll patch up some of those holes that we talked about between updates, between major features that are being added to the game. They'll help you, and they'll create a community around your game. And having people talk about your game is awesome. So I think that the next company that can, it's a multi-pronged, answer, but developing community, working with content creators, and making an awesome game. I mean, obviously the game has to be good for people to ultimately want to play it. And I think everybody, as a content creator, everybody's always on the lookout for who's going to be the next Supercell, or who's going to be that next big developer to give us viability for because we're looking for long-term viability as a content creator, just as developers are too. So what is the life of a game right now? That's something that no one even knows exactly the answer. What is the life of a mobile game? Clash of Clans has been going strong for 5 years, but is that an aberration, or is that the norm? It's difficult, and I know I've really dodged the question, but I don't know who's going to be the next Supercell. I think that hopefully, given platforms like YouTube and given platforms like Twitch and stuff like that, developers can somehow work better with content creators moving forward to kind of make multiple Supercells instead of just one or two. So who do you think is going to be the new Supercell, Lester?
That's what I'm at. I'm like, don't turn it back on. Yeah, well, I appreciate that thought, and I think from a content creation standpoint, it clearly relies on kind of replayability, the ability to kind of seed content so that there's always freshness, right? And I think it's a lot about kind of developing things outside of just the standard out-of-the-box gameplay, right? Like, how can you evolve that? What are some institutionalized ways of thinking of game modes that can be completely reversed, right? I think different modes and using derivative IP and kind of figuring out different ways to play with that, I've noticed give content creators a lot more to bite on, and also modes which lead towards unreachable goals, or really hard goals.
That's a good one.
Right? I think that no one thought that anyone would get to X top leaderboard or X wins or to some status, and I think building in kind of mechanics which the person will play every single day and also record every single day, because I think you want to get an audience who's inherited in your journey of doing something, right? And I think that with YouTube creators or even streamers, having a goal is like you kind of coming full circle. That was kind of like, what do you want to do at the end of the series, right? Are you doing a series on competitive play? Are you doing a series on tips? Are you doing a series on anything else, right? Like, what is the start and what's the finish? I think for developers, I've personally noticed that like setting these goals, like unreachable goals, also within games, help for that.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's coming from a bit of an MMO PC background side. I love the grind, and even if people don't say they don't love the grind, I think they deep down they do. It makes the game sticky, and it makes you want to stay around to kind of compete. So.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time here. I'm going to kick it over to Dan Atkins. He's over at the Daydream team, so he'll talk a little bit about building VR experiences within apps and games.
Cool. Thanks, Lester. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, man.